Hey folks, Colin here from Sumthins Recording, and today I want to tell you the truth about gain staging in your mix. We're going to talk about the mystical topic of gain staging today, but before we dive in, if you are ready to go a little bit deeper into the mixing process in its entirety and really start to hone your workflow as an engineer, then I have just the thing for you. It is my 7-step mixing checklist, and it's a simple PDF that will guide you through the entire mixing process, step by step, to help you get professional and radio-ready mixes without the hassle and without any more of the guesswork. It is a completely free guide, and you can download it below using the link in the video description. Now let's jump in here and talk about gain staging. Before we dive into an actual session and I show you how I gain stage or how I go about setting my levels before I start mixing, and I don't mean with the faders, I mean on the actual track, so setting the actual input gain levels of each recorded track, let's dispel a couple myths here about gain staging. The first one is the old kind of analog recording idea of you want to record your levels as hot as possible so you get, that tape saturation and the saturation from the preamps. That kind of idea has really fallen by the wayside with the rise of digital recording and audio interfaces or digital mixers. You do not need to record as hot as possible. As a matter of fact, you don't want to record as hot as possible because if you clip, that sounds nasty. Digital clipping sounds pretty bad, and there's not a lot of ways to fix that besides going out and buying an expensive plugin to try and get rid of the digital clipping. It's so much easier to just record at a nice conservative level. If it's too quiet, you can pull it up later in the mix. Click a couple gain buttons and pull it up a couple dB. But if it's too loud and it clips, that's a tough one to fix. That's our first myth to dispel there. So when you're gain staging, when you're recording, try and record at a nice conservative level. That will set you up for better gain staging come mixing time. Myth number 2 we need to dispel is the fader fidelity myth. So that's that idea that you want your fader as close to 0 as possible because it has the most fidelity and the most accuracy. Now, there is some truth to this. Like if we look in Studio One here, if I move my mouse, up and down, we're going up 0.4 dB with each movement of the mouse. But the farther down we go, suddenly we're moving 8, and then we get way down here, and we're moving quite a bit at each thing. So it's quite a difference, right? It's like double the difference way down here. And then when we get way down, right, it's like 2 and 3 dB way down there. So we do lose some accuracy way down there, but it's not worth pulling up, going through all your tracks, right, and making sure all the levels are at, -12 or -6 so you can keep the fader up by 0. It doesn't really make a huge difference if you're down here. If you're way down here and you need to make your track a half dB lower, you could just go in, right, and type in -25.5, right? Like, it's not that difficult that you need to go in and pull your track up like, oh, it's too quiet. I need to make it louder so I can keep the fader up. You don't want to play that game of like your fader gets down to like -11 and you're like, oh, I want to keep it up by 0. So let me bump up the gain on my track 6 dB or so to get it to sit right. That's not a game you want to start playing at all there. So there's no need to adjust the gain of your tracks to try and keep all your faders around 0. Yes, they do have more accuracy, but it doesn't make your tracks sound any better. So that's number 2 that we're talking about there. And number 3 is there's that idea that plugin manufacturers make these vintage emulation plugins or vintage model plugins to have the best sound if your input is at -18. So they want your track at -18 on the input going into the plugin so it'll sound the best, because old hardware used to be designed to work best if the input level was at -18. So there's this idea, and some plugin manufacturers do have it in their manuals too, that they work best if your input is at -18. I don't know how accurate that actually is. I'm pretty sure your plugins are going to sound pretty awesome at any level, and that's something that's just going to make it so much harder to get your gain staging done. If you have to go through each track and look at it and be like, okay, I want this track to be at -18, Kicks and snares, especially, their attack is going to make them seem louder on the meter than they actually are. So if you set it so your track's reading at -18, your kick is going to sound so quiet, your snare is going to sound so quiet that you're going to have it pulled way, way up over 0 to try and get it to sit right. That's not what you want. You don't want to be pushing your fader all the way up and you have no headroom on your fader to get it to sit right. There's no need to set all your levels at -18 so they push into your plugins right. Especially if you're not using analog modeled plugins, right? Like I use a lot of the stock plugins in Studio One, and there's zero reason for me to set all my tracks at -18 so they push into the plugin and we get the best sound out of the plugin. If it sounds good, it sounds good. There's no reason to chase that little bit better you could get, that little bit more fidelity you could get by setting all your tracks at -18 across the board. So you get more out of your fader fidelity or your plugins sound that much better. It's not worth that extra energy. Part of mixing is getting into the creative mode and living in that creative area, not chasing the technical side of, oh, I need my plugin to sound best, or my track has to be at this level in particular, or the fader has to stay at this level. That dispels you or keeps you away from the creative side. If you're trying to stay in your creative mindset, or your best zone, right? Your hot zone, you're trying to stay creative, but you're constantly chasing, oh, my fader has to be at this level, or the level on the input has to be -18. That constantly pulls you out of the creative zone and keeps you from getting the best mix possible. It pulls you out of that creative mindset and drags you down into the technical area of mixing, which is not where you want to be. So let me show you the simple way that I gain stage. So if we're looking at a mix here, you can kind of see everything's just set at an average level here in the middle. I don't go through and make sure everything's at a certain level. If I just come in, if I'm looking at a track or I pull tracks into my mix and it looks like that looks too loud. So I just pull it down till it's not too loud anymore. There's no need to chase it or make sure it's at a certain level. If it's at a decent level, it's fine. If it's too loud, pull it down. If it's too quiet, right? If I pull a track in and it looks like this, I know, okay, that needs to come up a little bit. So I'll pull it up in level a little bit. For me, it's as simple as that, all the way through the mix. If vocals are too loud, I pull vocals down. If I have a set of background vocals, I kind of just want to make sure they look all even. So you can see most of the background vocals here are looking pretty even. If one's a little quieter than all the others, give it a bump so it's sitting at about the same level as all the background vocals. That way you can mix them as a package. So it's little things like that, getting your gain staging right. I don't set everything at a certain level. The only kind of rule of thumb I follow when recording is I kind of make sure everything's sitting around -12. That gives me enough headroom on the way in that nothing clips and I don't have some super loud signal that I've recorded that's clipping or distorting on the way in. But it's not a hard and fast rule. If I'm recording and something's at -18, that's fine. I don't fret over boosting the input gain up so it's at -12. Or if it's at -10, I don't freak out that it's too loud and pull it down to -12. Anywhere in that range, somewhere around -12, is good enough for me that I know I have plenty of headroom. If the player starts to play louder, if the performer starts to sing louder, it's not going to clip. And if they sing quieter, it's not going to get too quiet. If my level's sitting way down around -30 or -25, I know that's too quiet and I know I need to pull that up. But that's something you can check as you're recording. But again, it's not the biggest deal in the digital world if something's really quiet. You can always just pull it up. And let me show you that shortcut I created. Here in Studio One, if you go to keyboard shortcuts, and it is, for me, it is -3 dB, and then the opposite one is +3 dB. So, +3, there's this macro called increase volume by 3 dB, and I just assigned it to the plus sign or the equal plus key on the keyboard. So that way I can just tap that and my volumes go up by 3 dB. Or the opposite, you saw it was to the minus key, right? I can pull it down 3 dB. So it's just simple things like that that help me get my gain staging faster. If I pull a track in and it's too loud, I can just click on it, click the minus key, it'll pull it down by 3 dB, and I can keep moving. Gain staging doesn't have to be this long, really enduring process or really grueling process that you have to go through and make sure all your tracks are at -18 and that your fader stays as close to 0 as possible. It doesn't have to be that complicated. It can be as simple as eyeballing it, going through, that track looks good, that track looks good. If something's too loud, pull it down a little bit, and get into the creative process as fast as possible. I hope that was helpful for you. I hope it wasn't too overwhelming. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, if you are ready to go a little bit deeper into the mixing process and take your mixes to the next level, then I have just the tool for you, and it is completely free. It is my 7-step mixing checklist, and you can download it below to start creating more professional mixes in less time. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.